In a faraway kingdom, a wise and just king ruled over his people with kindness. Under his reign, the land prospered, and its people adored their ruler. The king had a young son, the prince, who was not only brave but also compassionate. The people loved him deeply, for he showed great promise to continue his father's legacy. However, fate took a sorrowful turn when the beloved queen fell ill and passed away. The kingdom mourned, and the king, consumed by grief, found solace in a new companion. He soon remarried a woman of extraordinary beauty, whose charm and grace won over the court. To the kingdom, she appeared to be a perfect queen, bringing hope to a mourning land. Unknown to all, beneath her delicate smile lay a heart full of ambition and darkness. She was not just an ordinary woman, but someone who had carefully woven her way into the king's life with hidden intentions. She desired power, not love, and saw the prince as an obstacle in her path. Though she treated the prince with warmth in public, behind closed doors, she watched him with calculating eyes. She began to plant the seeds of her sinister plans, waiting for the right moment to act. The prince, unaware of her true nature, trusted her as his father did, never suspecting that his stepmother would one day change his life forever. The new queen quickly became a trusted figure in the royal court. Her beauty and grace enchanted everyone, but it was her ability to manipulate that made her truly dangerous. She spoke softly, carried herself with humility, and never openly opposed the king's decisions. Over time, her influence over him grew, and he began to rely on her advice. She understood that removing the prince all at once would raise suspicion. Instead, she worked patiently, weaving a web of deception that would turn father against son. She started by planting small doubts in the king's mind. Whenever the prince made a decision, she would question it subtly, making the king wonder if his son was too reckless or naive to rule. She spoke with concern, never outright accusing the prince, but always suggesting that he lacked the wisdom needed for leadership. To strengthen her deception, she created fake letters and messages, carefully forged to appear as though they came from the prince's closest allies. These letters spoke of secret meetings and plans to overthrow the king. At first, the king dismissed these as baseless rumours, but the queen knew how to feed his doubts, letting them grow gradually. She also used whispers in the court, spreading false stories among the noblemen. Soon, rumours reached the king that his son was impatient for the throne, that he was gathering supporters, and that he no longer respected his father's rule. Though the king loved his son dearly, these constant suggestions began to trouble him. Meanwhile, the prince remained unaware of the storm brewing around him. He continued to show love and respect for his father and treated his stepmother with kindness, never realizing that she was carefully turning his father's heart against him. His trust in her was his greatest mistake, for he did not see the shadows creeping closer, ready to change his fate forever. As the queen's influence over the king grew, she decided it was time to weaken the prince's support. She knew that as long as he had loyal allies by his side, he could resist her schemes. One by one, the prince's closest friends and trusted advisors began to disappear under mysterious circumstances. At first, no one suspected foul play. Some were said to have left the kingdom unexpectedly, while others were rumoured to have fallen ill or suffered unfortunate accidents. The prince was deeply troubled by these losses, especially when his most trusted mentor vanished without a trace. He searched for answers, but every lead led to a dead end. As the disappearances continued, whispers of suspicion spread throughout the court and the kingdom. The stepmother, working in the shadows, ensured that these rumors reached the right ears. Servants gossiped in hushed tones, noblemen exchanged concerned glances, and soon the idea took root. The prince himself was responsible. Why else would his closest allies disappear one after another? The queen was careful in her manipulation. She never openly accused the prince, but instead expressed her sorrow to the king. With a voice full of worry, she spoke of how power could corrupt even the purest hearts. She suggested that perhaps the prince was eliminating those who might oppose him when he took the throne. The king, already burdened with doubt, found himself unable to ignore these claims. Fear spread beyond the palace walls. The common people, once devoted to the prince, began to see him in a different light. If even the king seemed unsure of his son's innocence, then perhaps the rumors were true. Where once they greeted him with warmth and admiration, now they watched him with wary eyes. The prince felt the change in the air, but could not understand why. He did not know that his stepmother had orchestrated everything, nor did he realize that his isolation was part of a much larger plan. His world was slowly turning against him, and he was walking straight into a trap from which there would be no easy escape. The stepmother knew that the time had come for her final move. The prince, once beloved, was now surrounded by suspicion. His allies had vanished, and the king's trust in him had been severely weakened. However, to ensure the prince's complete downfall, she needed something undeniable: proof that he was a traitor. One night, she put her darkest plan into action. Under the cover of darkness, she summoned a group of mercenaries loyal to her, disguising them in the armor of the royal guards. Their mission was simple: stage an assassination attempt on the king and leave behind false evidence that pointed to the prince. The attack happened swiftly. The mercenaries broke into the royal chambers, where the king rested. Chaos erupted as guards rushed to defend him. Amid the confusion, the stepmother let out a chilling scream, calling for help. As the king fought off his attackers, the mercenaries suddenly retreated, leaving behind a dagger engraved with the prince's royal crest. The evidence was damning. The stepmother, in tears, turned to the king and spoke with sorrow. "My love," she whispered, "I never wanted to believe it, but how can we ignore this? Your own son, he has betrayed you." The king, still recovering from the attack, was devastated. He wanted to deny it, but the doubt that had been planted in his heart now took root. His beloved son, the one he had raised to rule, had supposedly tried to take his life. In his grief, the king did what he never imagined he would do. He ordered the prince's imprisonment. The royal guards, once loyal to the prince, hesitated. But the king's command was law. The prince, confused and heartbroken, did not resist. He pleaded his innocence, but no one listened. His father, his people, everyone had turned against him. He was led deep beneath the castle into a hidden underground prison, a place forgotten by time. The heavy iron doors slammed shut, trapping him in darkness. The echoes of betrayal filled the cold, damp walls. Above the ground, the stepmother stood beside the king, offering him comfort as he mourned. With the prince out of the way, she tightened her grip on the kingdom. The throne, once out of her reach, was now hers to control. Her plan had worked, and the prince, her greatest obstacle, was lost to the world. The underground prison was a place of endless darkness. The air was damp, the walls cold, and the silence suffocating. The prince sat alone, chained to the stone floor, his once proud posture now slumped in despair. He had fought battles before, but nothing compared to the battle raging inside him now. a battle between hope and hopelessness. Days turned into weeks. Food was scarce, and the prince survived on stale bread and water brought to him by the guards. He had no way of knowing how much time had passed. The only thing he could do was think. At first, his mind was consumed with confusion. How had everything gone so wrong? How had his own father, who had once loved him so deeply, believed such terrible lies? As time passed, his thoughts became clearer. He began to replay the events leading up to his downfall. The whispers, the missing allies, the looks of doubt in the king's eyes. It all made sense now. His stepmother had planned everything. She had poisoned the king's mind, turning him against his own son. The prince realized that her kindness had always been an act, a mask to hide her true intentions. One night, as he lay weak and exhausted, he heard a soft knock against the iron bars of his cell. A flickering torch revealed the face of an old servant, one who had served the royal family for decades. Unlike the others, this man had not abandoned the prince. With careful hands, he passed a small bundle of food and whispered, "Not all have turned against you, my prince." Tears welled in the prince's eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt the warmth of kindness. The old servant continued to visit in secret, bringing food and news from the outside world. Through him, the prince learned that the kingdom was changing. The stepmother had taken full control, and the people who once adored him now feared his name. Strength slowly returned to the prince's body, but more importantly, it returned to his heart. He refused to let his story end in darkness. If no one would rescue him, he would rescue himself. He started paying attention to every detail: the guard's schedule, the structure of the prison, the hidden cracks in the stone walls. The prince was no longer just a prisoner. He was a warrior preparing for his greatest battle, the fight for his freedom. One night, as the prince sat in his cell, lost in thought, he heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Expecting a guard, he remained still. But when the heavy iron door creaked open, he saw not a soldier, but an old woman wrapped in a dark cloak. Her eyes, though aged, held a sharpness that sent a shiver down his spine. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not belong in this darkness, young prince. You have been deceived." The prince studied her, unsure if she was real or just another cruel trick played by his stepmother. But before he could speak, she continued. "The woman who has stolen your father's trust is not who she claims to be. She is not just a queen. She was once a powerful sorceress, banished from this kingdom long ago." Doubt flickered in the prince's eyes, but something deep inside him told him to listen. The old woman explained that years before his birth, the stepmother had practiced dark magic, using her powers to manipulate and control those around her. She had sought power beyond what was allowed, and when the kingdom's elders discovered her treachery, they cast her out, stripping her of her title and magic. For years, she had wandered, seeking revenge. When she heard of the king's grief after the queen's death, she saw her opportunity. Through deceit and remnants of forbidden spells, she returned, disguising herself as the perfect wife. With dark magic hidden in her words, she slowly bent the king's will to her own. The doubts he felt, the growing fear in the kingdom, the evidence against the prince, it had all been carefully crafted illusions. The prince clenched his fists, fury rising in his chest. He had always known something was wrong, but he had never imagined the depth of her deception. He had lost everything to her lies: his father, his throne, his freedom. The old woman reached into her cloak and pulled out a small glowing token. This is all that remains of the power once used to banish her. It will break the spell she has woven around the king. But be warned, her magic is strong, and she will not surrender easily. The prince took the token, feeling its warmth against his palm. For the first time since his imprisonment, hope burned in his heart. The battle was not over yet. He would not remain in chains. He would rise, and he would reclaim what was rightfully his. The night was silent, the air thick with tension, as the prince prepared for his escape. The old woman and the loyal servant had worked in secrecy, studying the guards' routines and finding a path through the underground tunnels. The prince, weakened from his time in captivity, but fueled by determination, gripped the magical token tightly. He knew this was his only chance. As the guards made their usual rounds, the servant created a distraction, knocking over a pile of barrels in the storage room above. The sudden noise sent the guards rushing to investigate, leaving the path to freedom momentarily unguarded. The old woman led the prince through a hidden passage, its walls damp with age and its air heavy with the scent of earth. At the end of the tunnel, a small wooden door led to the outskirts of the city. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the prince breathed in the open air. But there was no time to rest. He had to reach the palace before the stepmother could tighten her grip further. Disguised in ragged clothes, his once golden hair covered in dirt, he moved through the streets as a beggar, unnoticed by those who had once cheered his name. When he finally reached the palace gates, he called out to the guards, "I bear a message for the king." His voice, though rough from hunger, carried authority. The guards hesitated, but the urgency in his eyes convinced them to let him pass. Inside, the king sat on his throne, weary and distant. The stepmother stood beside him, her expression cold and calculating. As the prince stepped forward, gasps echoed through the hall. The queen's face twisted in shock, but she quickly masked it with feigned concern. "My son?" the king whispered, disbelief in his voice. "How can this be? You were—" "Betrayed," the prince interrupted, his gaze locked onto his stepmother's. "Everything you have been told was a lie. She is no queen. She is a sorceress who has deceived you and the entire kingdom." The stepmother laughed, a sound both beautiful and cruel. "My king, do you hear his madness? He returns after vanishing for so long, speak in riddles like a fool." But the prince was prepared. He pulled the glowing token from his cloak, its light illuminating the dark corners of the throne room. The stepmother's confident smile faltered. "This," the prince said, "is the only thing that can break your spell." The king's eyes widened as a sudden clarity washed over him. The whispers in his mind, the doubts that had clouded his judgment, all of it began to unravel. He turned to his wife, horror dawning on his face. "What have you done?" Realizing her illusion was breaking, the stepmother let out a furious cry. With a wave of her hand, dark tendrils of magic lashed out, aiming for the prince. But he held the token high, and the moment the dark energy touched its light, the magic shattered like glass. The stepmother screamed as the power she had stolen was stripped away. The spell she had woven around the king collapsed, leaving her vulnerable. She fell to her knees, her beauty fading, revealing the twisted sorceress beneath. The guards surrounded her, awaiting the king's command. He rose from his throne, sorrow and fury in his eyes. "You have betrayed my family, my kingdom, and my heart. You will answer for your crimes." For the first time in years, the prince saw his father as he truly was, free from deception. The battle was over, but justice was yet to be served. With the stepmother's magic broken and her true nature exposed, the truth spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants, guards, and nobles who had once feared the prince now looked at him with shame and regret. They had believed the queen's lies, turning their backs on their rightful heir. Now they saw the deception for what it was. The king, his heart heavy with guilt, called for a gathering in the royal courtyard. The entire kingdom was summoned to witness the truth. As the people filled the square, whispers of confusion and shock rippled through the crowd. When they saw the prince standing beside the king, alive, strong, and free, they knew something had changed. The king stepped forward, his voice firm yet sorrowful. "I have been blinded by lies, deceived by the woman I once called my queen. She wove a spell upon my mind and turned me against my own son." His words carried across the courtyard, igniting gasps among the people. The prince then spoke, his voice unwavering. "She banished my allies, poisoned my father's heart, and cast me into the darkness. But her reign of deception ends today." The guards dragged the stepmother forward, her once beautiful face now twisted with rage and fear. The people who had once admired her grace now saw her for what she truly was. A traitor. Anger filled the crowd as they cried out for justice. The king, despite his sorrow, would not allow vengeance to corrupt his judgment. "She shall not be executed," he declared. "Instead, she will suffer the fate she once escaped. She is to be banished to the dark forests, where no soul dares to wander." The stepmother screamed, pleading, but there was no mercy left for her. The guards led her away, her cries fading into the distance as she was cast into exile. No one ever saw her again. Some say the forest swallowed her whole. Others whispered that she still lurked in the shadows, waiting for another chance at revenge. With her gone, peace returned to the kingdom. The prince, finally free, stood before his people, no longer a prisoner, but a hero. The king, overcome with remorse, embraced his son, vowing never to let deceit blind him again. The people cheered, their faith in their prince restored. The darkness that had loomed over the kingdom had lifted. The rightful heir had returned, and with him hope for a brighter future. With the stepmother gone and her dark influence lifted, the kingdom slowly began to heal. The prince, once falsely accused and cast into darkness, now stood before his people as their rightful leader. At first, there was hesitation. Guilt lingered in the eyes of the nobles and citizens who had once believed the worst of him. But the prince did not rule with resentment. Instead, he led with wisdom, proving through his actions that he was worthy of their trust. His first decree was one of justice. He reinstated the advisors and allies who had been wrongfully cast aside, rewarding those who had remained loyal. He ensured that the kingdom's laws would never again allow a ruler to act without accountability. The court became a place of honesty, where deception had no power. Under his rule, the kingdom flourished. Trade routes reopened, the people prospered, and the fear that had once gripped the land was replaced with hope. The king, humbled by his mistakes, stepped back, allowing his son to lead while offering guidance from the shadows. The bond between father and son, once shattered by lies, was now stronger than ever. The prince never forgot the darkness he had endured, nor the lesson it had taught him. He knew that power could be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands, and so he ruled with fairness, always seeking the truth. His story became a legend, a tale passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and despair, perseverance and truth would always prevail. And so, the kingdom stood strong, not just because of the prince's leadership, but because of the lessons learned from his struggle. Deception had once poisoned the land, but in the end, truth had set it free.